therapists, is there a chance that you could be running your therapy practice in a way that could get you into trouble with your state licensing board, get you grieved without even realizing that you're doing some things that could be considered questionable? It's actually fairly common and honestly easy to do. Even therapists with the best of intentions who are operating in ways that they think are ethical and appropriate can stumble into some really regrettable situations where they wind up getting their licenses grieved for things that they did not even realize at the time could be viewed as deeply problematic. So, of course, this is a very scary thing to even consider. Having your license grieved is one of the worst things that can happen to a therapist. But that's why we're talking about it on this episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists. By the end of our time together today, I hope that you have some new insight and newfound clarity into some things that are like do's and don'ts that will help protect you and your license and your clients. One of the biggest things that therapists can and do get into a lot of trouble for, that they can really blunder into, is actually doing one of the things that we all aspire to do if we have a solo private practice, right? Which is getting really busy and having a lot of clients and a caseload with many people that you're trying to manage. That then has this dark side where it is so many people and so much to manage that we exceed our ability to do a really good job of staying connected to individual clients, communicating with everybody, doing all of the things that we need to do to be operating effectively. So case notes, documentation, returning calls and emails. And one of the things that can happen is that therapists can get very overwhelmed. There's a backlog. I mean, we've all been there, like 30 emails at the end of the day. It's like, but not operating your practice in such a way that you have the capacity to cope with that turns into not responding to clients who are trying to get in touch with you. Maybe they need help. Maybe they need to access their portal. Maybe they are trying to schedule an appointment with you and your schedule has become so full that you're not able to see them. Could be a lot of other things. Maybe they are actually legitimately not okay. But what this can turn into for therapists is actually abandoning clients in practical ways. So Counseling Ethics 101 is that we cannot abandon our clients, meaning that if we have a relationship with a therapy client where we have agreed to provide services, they have agreed to be our clients, is that we have an ethical and fiduciary duty to maintain that relationship with a client, or be very active and proactive in making sure that there is continuity of care for that client with another provider if for some reason we are not able to be that person for them. So one of the things that happens, this is like a really common scenario, busy therapist, full private practice, kind of maxed out, and then perhaps their schedule changes, the therapist schedule changes, and they've had a client or three who was in a slot, a time slot, right, that doesn't exist anymore for whatever reason. And now the therapist is responsible for making sure that they are available, reasonably available to that client at another time. But what happens is that if a therapist is overwhelmed, they're going back and forth with scheduling, a client is trying to schedule something and balls get dropped, and perhaps a therapist might even forget to respond to a client. They have 40 people on their caseload and, Emily, oh, right, I needed to get back in touch with her to get something on the schedule and does not reach back out to Emily. And just consider this, like, what if something bad happens to Emily? Like, actually, maybe Emily is a trauma survivor. She's dealing with complex trauma. She is not all right. And she actually does need a present therapist who is paying attention, checking in with her, making sure that subsequent appointments are scheduled. And if that therapist isn't doing that and something regrettable happens to Emily, if there is an investigation, it is going to turn into a lack of care, that the therapist will have dropped the ball, not maintained their end of the bargain when it comes to that contractual relationship, that they have not been practicing by not just best practices, but also by basic ethical standards. And that therapist will get into a lot of trouble for it. So just to say this out loud in the spirit of a big sister who also happens to be a clinical supervisor, is that if you take on a new client, you have to be available for them, and you also can't drop clients. You cannot disappear. You can't stop showing up to sessions, or if it's not convenient for you to work with this client anymore, right? You have to, at the very, very least, stay closely connected with that client for long enough to, ensure that you know what they need, and then not even just make a referral if you've decided, like, I can't be that person for this client, but also maintain care. Make sure that you are staying connected with a person, particularly if they have significant mental health stuff going on, until you know for sure that they have been resituated with a different provider. Perhaps there is a consultation with that new provider, a warm handoff to ensure that your client is there, making sure that you are documenting everything, documenting your efforts to provide that continuity of care, and make sure that your client is being treated appropriately, even if long term you have come to understand that you don't have the capacity to be that person for your client. That's okay. You don't have to be everything for everyone, but you do need to stay in the ring for clients that are currently active with you until they are active with somebody else. Now, another piece of this that can happen if therapists can and do get super busy is simply not managing their client caseloads well in terms of paperwork, documentation, and all of the different small things that we all need to be doing in order to really be doing a genuinely good job. I have unfortunately had this happen in my own practice where things get really busy. Maybe I've stopped seeing a client, and maybe I've made a little note on their file, like, no further sessions are required. That could be great. But also, maybe I forget to do that, or I stop seeing a client and don't document that, or also don't formally close their files, right? So then if something did happen to that client, and there was an investigation, perhaps a client was under the impression that we were going to be checking in with them, or that we were going to be reaching out to schedule appointments with them, and something happens and we wind up getting investigated. If we have an open file sitting there that does not have documentation, that we had a conversation with the client and agreed that we're not scheduling appointments anymore, that no referral is necessary, again, we are going to be on the hook for failing to do our jobs. Likewise, if we get really busy, we have so many people that we're thinking about, so many people to take care of, we can start bumping into the margins of our available time to do things that require a lot of thought and care and attention and strategic thinking. Things like doing regular assessments that, we are going the extra mile to check in with clients, maybe send them a questionnaire, go back and read through their notes and remind ourselves, what were we talking about? What were we working on? What are things that I need to be mindful of? And when we're not doing that, we can miss things. And when we miss things and something blows up, we are going to get in trouble for failing to see it coming. Perhaps there is an episode of major depressive disorder that has been brewing and that wasn't on our radar, and it turned into perhaps a suicide attempt. Or maybe, we've been so focused on talking about somebody's career stuff, we have forgotten that they do actually have a pretty serious historical substance use disorder, and that we haven't talked about that in a while. while until they get drunk behind the wheel and crash their car into a school bus or something. I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And so I think we all need to remember to slow down enough, or go back, read the notes, think about what we need to be assessing. Are we doing case conceptualizations? And are we really doing a high quality job to make sure that we're aware of what is going on in facets of our clients' lives? What do they need from us right now? And how do we be thinking and assessing about this in order to make sure that we are staying connected? Because this is such an important thing, I actually recently recorded another podcast on the topic of how and why we should always be assessing our clients, even long-term clients who we think we know really well. Perhaps we've gotten into a groove. Those are actually the clients that can surprise you the most if you're kind of going on autopilot, checking out a little bit. So check out that last podcast episode if you want a little refresh on how to develop a healthy and vibrant practice that is based on always assessing your clients regularly so that you don't get surprised by something that in retrospect you could, maybe should have seen coming. So that double-edged sword of being busy in a positive way, but not to the point where it begins to overwhelm our capacity to function in effective ways, is one of the most important things that you can do to do a good job with your clients, but also protect your license from getting grieved. In this next chapter, we're going to take a look at another thing that therapists can blunder into, which is blurred boundaries and in ways that you might surprise you. So click on the next video and we'll keep talking. So click on the next video to learn about what those are, the surprising ones that you might not be thinking about right now, and also some strategies for how to avoid running into trouble with blurred boundaries unknowingly and unintentionally, because it happens a lot. More than you'd think. This week on Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists, we are talking about what therapists need to do to avoid going sideways with state licensing boards and regulatory agencies in ways that are surprising to them. It happens more often than you would think. Therapists believe that they are behaving appropriately, or at least not to the degree that they would actually be censured by a state licensing board. But then something happens, they get investigated, and they are found to be in the wrong. And then they have to deal with the consequences. So today we're talking about the things that all therapists need to be thinking about and doing in order to make sure that they are operating ethically and impeccably for their clients, but also for themselves so that they don't get into trouble. If this is your first time with me, I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I myself am a licensed psychologist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a very proud board certified coach, and I'm also an AAMFT approved clinical supervisor of other therapists. And at my counseling and coaching practice, Growing Self, we are very, very focused on operating with love. It is one of our core values, and love is an umbrella term for many things: how we treat other people, how we operate, but also when it comes to ethics. Always being sure that we are acting in ways that prioritize the well-being of our clients in words and deeds. Also prioritizing the well-being of therapists in my practice, because that's part of this equation too. But when we look at things from a love lens, then we can come to identify whether or not there are some things happening in the way we're practicing that maybe shouldn't be, that we can then, see like, okay, that's problematic. We should stop doing that. That has been a foundational feature of my practice. I think it's kept us out of trouble. But I know that many therapists, perhaps you, are operating as solo private practitioners and can be fairly isolated in that, right? So you don't have the security of a group group around you to consult with and kind of, pay attention to what other people are doing, to be staying connected to best practices. And I think it is when therapists are operating in isolation that they start to really run into trouble to the point where they can actually step on a landmine and do something that they didn't even realize was questionable, but wind up getting their licenses grieved or sometimes even revoked. And so another important thing on this subject is that therapists have to be very, very cautious about blurred boundaries with our clients. So, of course, you might be thinking, yeah, Lisa, that's like the first thing that we learned on day one of ethics and counseling. Don't have sex with your clients, right? Don't go into a business partnership with a client when you see an attractive opportunity, right? Like, I got it. I know how to have boundaries, right? No dual relationships. But did you know that a lot of therapists can get into a lot of trouble by operating in the way that regrettably many therapists do, which is by having a blurred boundary situation where they are disclosing way too many things about themselves or their personal lives that do not have a real purpose in the work that they are doing with their clients. Client drops in, talks about something going on, and then a therapist says, yes, that reminds me of this one chapter in my life, and sort of goes on for a 15-minute monologue while the person sitting on their couch is kind of like nodding. Oh, wow, that sounds like a really challenging situation. And they're paying the therapist for that. That is a huge waste of people's time and money. And many therapists operate under this mindset that they are teaching their clients something by sharing stories about themselves and their own lives. And so we have to also consider the fact that uneducated, unqualified, unlicensed life coaches, they are operating from this belief system. They feel qualified to help other people by sharing their stories and teaching other people about their life experiences because they believe that that would be helpful for clients. And again, that is what amateur life coaches on TikTok do. That is not what professional ethical therapists do. Our job is to help other people get into contact with themselves and understand themselves and learn and grow from the inside out, not emulate us. It is very important for you to be thinking about in every session. If you are about to open your mouth, particularly if you feel inspired to share a personal story, to think, how does this relate to what my client is going through? And is this truly for their benefit? Or would it be gratifying for me to be telling this story? Consider the possibility that you might be getting some of your personal relational needs met through your relationship with your clients if you find yourself sharing a lot about you. So, general rule of thumb to avoid getting into trouble here: when in doubt, err on the side of shutting up. This is not about you. If you feel like talking, ask your client another question, right? And if you think a client can learn from your life, why don't you ask them? I think going back, always be assessing and making sure that you're staying in alignment for your clients. Check in with them. I notice, sometimes in our sessions, or actually pretty commonly, I am sharing stories with you about my life. What is that like for you? Is that helpful for you. Keeping in mind that there is a very real power dynamic where your client may or may not feel totally open to provide you with honest feedback, particularly if they are worried about how you might take that feedback. So just be super aware of that. But also just be receptive to what they are saying and be able and willing to modify your approach based on what your client is telling you they need, but also on evidence-based best practices. I'm not sure I have encountered an evidence-based therapeutic model that has outcome studies and that has been shown to be highly effective that is based on therapists talking about themselves and sharing stories about their own lives. From time to time, I do think that there is moments for, brief moments of empathy. Like, I think a lot of people struggle with that. I've struggled with the same at various points in my life, and I know that it's hard. And that's where it stops. We don't need to go into 5 paragraphs about your parents' divorce, right? It would just be very, very cautious with that. The therapists have gotten grieved for operating from that stance, not being in alignment with a evidence-based therapeutic model, particularly with clients who have real treatment needs. If something happens to that client, or if a client, spends 3 years with you, paying you a bunch of money to listen to your stories that isn't really doing anything to create outcomes in their life, and then they connect with a therapist who operates in a more effective way, they might have a moment where they're like, what in the actual hell was I doing with that therapist for 3 years? I want my money back. And you know what? They're not wrong. And it turns into a lawsuit, and you could potentially get into a lot of trouble. So again, it's totally understandable that you have things that are going on in your life. We all do. But therapists can and do need their own therapy. Maybe you need a space for you to be talking about yourself, processing your own stuff. That is fantastic to do that work. Just do it on your dime, not that of your clients. So that's another thing that therapists can get into trouble for without even realizing the enormity, the significance of what they are doing. In the next chapter, we are going to be talking about another situation that can be surprising to therapists, but also create a lot of trouble for them. And that is related to the binary dimensions of ethics. The first, of course, is do no harm. But the second is not around malfeasance. It's around beneficence, meaning that we also need to be doing good. And if we are failing to be doing good, we are not operating ethically, and we can get into trouble for that. So in this next chapter, that's where we're going. I hope you click on the next video to find out what that means and how you can avoid running into that problem with your practice. On this episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists, we are exploring some of the ethical pitfalls that therapists like me, like you, can run into without even realizing that we are doing it, but that can truly blow up in our faces, creating negative outcomes for clients, but also potentially getting us in big trouble with state licensing boards, regulatory agencies having our licenses grieved or revoked. And so in every segment of this podcast today, we're talking about what those are so that you have more visibility into whether or not any of those are happening in your practice, despite your good intentions, and so that you can take steps to correct this, get back on track, protect your clients, but also protect yourself. If this is your first time tuning in, I am your host, Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I myself, like you, am a licensed psychologist. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am a proud board certified coach. I am also an AAMFT approved clinical supervisor, and I'm the founder of a large group private practice, Growing Self-Counseling and Coaching. So we have, 50 plus therapists running around here. I see clients, I do supervision. I'm also here talking to you because over the course of my career, I've really learned a lot about what it's like to be a therapist. And that's what Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists is all about, is really being a support person for you in this challenging career. And, as the director of a group private practice, we have a lot of structures in place that are really all about the well-being of clinicians and clients. So we can come up alongside a therapist that maybe we're worried about, or who has maybe been making some missteps with great intentions, not even realizing that they're doing anything wrong a lot of the times, but just to be able to say, hey, notice this is happening. Let's kind of move in this direction. So we're able to protect people and keep everybody safe. And I also know that very commonly, many therapists, people like us, are working in solo private practices. I did that myself for years. And I know how isolating it can be. You might not have somebody who is close enough to you day to day to be able to provide you with feedback or guidance that can help you stay out of trouble, or even just, think about things a little bit differently. So that's one of the main intentions of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists, is to be that person for you. And so that's why today we're talking about some of these ethical pitfalls that are genuinely surprising for therapists. I mean, it is not uncommon for a therapist to be chugging along doing their thing and get the surprise, letter from a state licensing board letting them know that they have been grieved and hear what's going on, and there's going to be an investigation, which is basically like the worst thing that can happen to a therapist, aside, from losing a client, obviously. But it is also profoundly shocking to them, because they legitimately had no idea that they were going to get into trouble for doing whatever they've been doing. So in this segment, we are going to talk about the duality of ethics and how you can run afoul if you're not paying attention to the two sides of ethics, which is, first of all, of course, malfeasance, do no harm. And we all pretty much have that memo. We cannot operate in ways that are actively harmful to our clients. Okay, got that. Nailed that one. But on the other side, ethics is also about beneficence, meaning that we must be doing good in order to be operating in ethical ways. And if you are not doing good, you are not operating ethically. So let's talk more about what that means. So doing good, doing right by our clients, and having a therapeutic relationship with them that is positive and that helps them achieve their outcomes, their treatment goals, that they are getting something out of working with us. Certainly, this encompasses many things that we've been talking about. It is all of the clinical stuff that we have to do. Having a case conceptualization, whether or not you're doing a formal treatment plan, do you have a clear understanding of what is going on with their client and what the trajectory towards change will be for them? And are you structuring your sessions in a way that is congruent with helping them create the ultimate outcomes that they want in an intentional way? Or is it just sort of dropping into each session like, hey, how you been? What's going on? Should we talk about work? What, blah, 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 without really keeping an eye on what it is that your client is really trying and needing to get out of this. If you're not doing basic things like that, you are not operating ethically. Additionally, you are not operating ethically if you aren't keeping track of whether or not your client is still truly benefiting from working with you. And I think the biggest risk here is the narrative and the mindset that we therapists can have. And through, in some ways, no fault of our own. I mean, I think in counseling school, particularly in older modalities, there is this idea that the relationship itself is healing, is helpful to our clients. And of course, there's a lot of legitimacy to that, but also we need to be thinking critically about whether or not the relationship has truly run its course, that our clients did get what they wanted or needed to get out of their relationship with us. They came in with anxiety or unresolved trauma, and they are in a much better place. But now they just like talking to us. We are serving as this quasi friend in their lives. And certainly clients enjoy this, and we enjoy this. It feels good. It feels like a connection. But as therapists, if we're operating ethically, we need to be asking ourselves, is this really still helping my client? Or would it be more ethical for me at this point in our work together to be thinking about why is my client continuing to pay me every week or every other week, perhaps instead of developing close, emotionally intimate relationships with other people in their lives, right? And how can I support my client in doing that so that they are not dependent upon me to meet their emotional intimacy needs, because that is not really okay. And certainly there is a time and a place for very deep and long-term work. I myself have had a number of clients that I have worked with for many, many years, and we are essentially doing a deep reparenting kind of experience that can only happen over long periods of time. And if you are going that deep with your clients, that is amazing. And that may truly be exactly what they need. But also, as therapists, we all need to be at the back of our minds, our number one goal, what needs to be happening in therapy so that my client does not need me anymore. That is the ultimate outcome of very effective and successful therapy. I know a lot of clinicians who are effective, competent, and who also catch and hold clients for a long time. These are clinicians who do tend to do deeper work. But I have also encountered clinicians who operate in deep ways, who are not always thinking critically around whether or not they are creating unhealthy and frankly, unethical dependencies with their clients. And maybe you aren't, but it needs to be brought into visibility, because you could get into trouble if you are doing this without fully realizing that you are. And so that's why I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Another very important piece of operating ethically and doing no harm is to make sure that you are not only practicing clinical modalities that are evidence-based, that are for a purpose, you're clear about why a client is here and what you are working towards together, and you are having conversations about this, but that you are able and competent to modify this approach based on a deep understanding of diversity, multiculturalism, different life experiences, because people are different. Everybody has a race, a culture, and a set of life experiences that are different from anyone else's and different from yours. And that's why a fundamentally important part of beneficence, of doing good, is you being very, very aware of that. Because therapists will get into trouble if they are operating the same way with everybody, coming at all their clients with this little cookie cutter, right? And unintentionally creating real harm for clients in the process because of their own ignorance. And therapists can and do get grieved for this. And this can happen in different ways. This can happen around not fully understanding how dimensions of race, culture, socioeconomic background, or life experience require you to flex your approach in order to be effective with different types of clients. But this can also extend to your ability to think critically about your own scope of competence with a lot of humility. Again, clinicians in solo private practice, particularly, I'm just going to say this out loud, ones who may struggle to fill their practice and get enough clients will often say yes to working with clients that are maybe on the growing edge of their scope of competence and maybe even a little further beyond that. And so they are attempting to work with clients who are coming in with presenting issues or needs that maybe a therapist doesn't have the full training, experience, or competence that is truly required to be able to do a good job with these clients. And remember, it's very hard for our clients to be able to evaluate quality and to make informed decisions around what kind of therapist should I choose? How do I know that a therapist has the qualifications that they need in order to be able to help me? Like, there's not a good of information out in the world for clients about that. And certainly if you're on insurance panels, I mean, a lot of times the reason why clients choose you is because you take their insurance and you have availability and great, right? Let's do this. But it's very important to pay attention to your own feelings around how is this going? Is this client benefiting from working with me? And do I feel confident in my ability to be helpful to them? So that's why so often on the show, I'm talking about the importance of seeking a consultation with other professional peers, getting back into supervision if you're starting to work with a new client population that you feel like you need guidance around, right? To check yourself and make sure that you're doing a good job. Continue to educate yourself. I mean, continuing education is not just a box you check every couple of years when it's time to get relicensed. It is an opportunity for you to continue growing and expanding yourself professionally. And it's important for you, for all of us, to be doing this. And this is not in any way, shape, or form a critical statement or one that is intended to be shaming. This is me saying out loud something that we all need to be hearing and thinking about as therapists. If we feel like we are in over our heads with a client, consider the possibility that you might be, and that is okay. Then the most loving and ethical thing that you can do for a client is to recognize the limitations of your own professional competence without any shame. There is nothing wrong with you because you don't know how to help every single person in the history of the universe, right? What matters is that you have the integrity and the courage and the self-awareness to be able to know what those limits are, and then the love to operate with love for your client and to help them get connected to a provider who can be more genuinely helpful to them than you can be. There is no shame in that. And maybe you identify a new area of professional growth for yourself in the process. How cool is that? Very lastly, on this subject, I will also say, my education and training, so licensed psychologist, spiritual family therapist, but also I am a board certified coach, which is a very important part of my practice. And I think that many therapists don't fully have an awareness of coaching psychology, what it is, how it works, how to apply it in effective ways with high functioning clients who do not have mental health issues that they're seeking treatment for. So therapists who are traditionally trained, who know how to provide psychotherapy, might have a client who is coming in for growth and goals work. They do not have a diagnosis. They are here because they want help in changing something about their lives. And they trust a therapist being able to do that. But a standard issue therapist has not been trained how to do that. We therapists, as therapists, are trained how to diagnose and treat mental health conditions, not walk people through a growth process that emphasizes doing things differently, creating different life outcomes. That is what evidence-based coaching psychology practices are for. They are highly effective and they are the appropriate modality to use with clients like that. But if you have these clients coming in and you're trying to do standard issue talk therapy with them, not only are you going to frustrate the heck out of them, if they really wanted to, they could say, you know what, that was such a waste of time and money. My therapist did not know how to help me. They were not qualified to help me. They told me that they were, but they really weren't. different. And you know what? I'm going to do something about that because I want to get my money back. Just consider that as a possibility. If you would like to develop professional understanding and competence in the area of evidence-based coaching, I do have options for you. I have created a certification program for licensed therapists to become board certified coaches, which is the kind of coaching credential that licensed therapists get. It's an accredited program, and as a entry point to see if this is something that you would want to be interested in, I've created a free 2-part training series with me that walks you through a series of exercises. There's the whole workbook, there's videos that will help you get clarity about your own professional trajectory, really what you want to be doing as a helping professional, and to learn about coaching psychology and whether or not incorporating coaching into your practice in a structured way would help you be able to do more of the kind of work that you wanted to do in an ethical way because of really being truly competent to provide help for people through this modality that we don't get taught in counseling school. So if you want to check that out, come to my website, growingself.com/coach. So of course, operating with integrity and high ethics, avoiding malfeasance, and making sure that we have beneficence in every way is very important to protect not just our clients and help them have a good and productive experience, but also protect our licenses from getting grieved at the end of the day. But there is one last thing that therapists can and do get grieved for all the time. So you can tune in to this next chapter either on YouTube or track me down on LinkedIn. Let's be friends. My handle there is Dr. Lisa Bobby. Send me a friend request. I will totally accept. And then you can see all of the different videos that I've posted in this series and also be part of the conversation. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have other ethical dilemmas or questions that are on your mind, things you've been running into in your practice, and we'll talk it through maybe on another episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists. But thanks again for joining me for this video.